Other than my grades, what can I do to better my chances of getting into a good college?
Remember, it's more than just academic preparation. It is, how am I vested in the community? How am I vested in my high school or junior high? What clubs, organizations, or extracurricular events that I participate in, am I adding value? Am I making a difference? It's not just a litany of I'm in 20 clubs. It's, we would much prefer to see a student in fewer clubs, but that have vested themselves and made a true difference in their life and in other people's lives, whatever that may be, as opposed to a bunch of clubs where the reality at the end of the day, you participated, but there was really no true reflective change. Another would be, maybe I'm doing a little less in my high school, but I'm very involved on a particular medical or environmental cause. So I'm in with the different professional organizations or nonprofits within my community. Those would be the same thing. It is participating and saying, I'm passionate and I want to help make a difference, whatever that difference is. And again, we're not judging what the topic is. We're judging, did you take hold and grab it and move forward? The issue here is that you took hold of something and made a difference, and that you vested yourself. You were excited, you were passionate. Those are the things that we would be looking for, not just a type of student. Because remember, our goal in building, whether you're looking at Vanderbilt or any school that's a highly selective elite school like Vanderbilt, what you're looking at is, or what we're looking at, excuse me, is building a community. If everybody was just involved in one activity, what a boring community we would be developing. It is the individual strength of each person coming. The sum of all those make the great class.
How important are extracurricular activities and sports when applying to college?
Remember, when we talk about being involved doesn't mean 95 clubs. It may be a handful, but how did you participate? So for example, maybe you really wanted to be in program X, Y, and Z and couldn't do it in the school. What did you find out in your community? What did you find in your local area, or what have you? Because again, you need to participate, but you have to be able to look at lots of venues to do that. We also can look at a school where it perhaps has, I hate giving numbers, but for just purposes of description, maybe a school that has 60 or 70 students in a class. You have to look there of the opportunities to a school that had 800 in the same class. And again, so that's where we're understanding and contextualizing your high school. So we're trying to look at that in one school, they may only be in 2 things because of the sheer number. They can't be in anything else. Or in a lot of times larger schools, they'll even limit the number of extracurriculars that are the main core extracurricular at the school you can have. Versus a smaller school, you may be wearing multiple hats because you've got to do that to keep the school running, to keep that environment. So again, we would look at both sides of that equation, and it's all about you, your application, and who you are as we think about you joining this community, not you in relationship to everyone else.
How should I prepare for my college essay? What if I'm not the greatest writer?
When I talk to students, and for 21 years that I've been doing this in all facets in higher education, I really, if there's anything I can leave with you today, would be authentic and understand we want to hear from you and who you are. That doesn't mean counselors, teachers, your mother, your father, grandparents, or you get somebody else to make sure, does it make sense, is it structured well, or is it grammatically put in place? Those are all important things, and part of teamwork today is you pull upon those resources so that there's strength. But at the end of the day, doing this again as long as I've done it, you can start to tell if a student has had someone else write their essay. It doesn't seem to match their letters of recommendation, it doesn't match their other writing samples, it doesn't perhaps match their extracurricular activities, to where it is much more reflective and thought-provoking perhaps than a 17-year-old would have life experience to be. Now that doesn't mean there aren't wonderful writers and people that are highly reflective and thought-provoking at 17, but usually that comes through in everything we're reading about the student versus we have kind of all these other aspects about the student, but then the essay's off the charts over here. You want to make sure it's the authentic voice of who you are. And let me tell you why that's important. It's not just important so that we know who you are. I mean, that's a critical piece, but you want to be at a school that has the same fit and background that brings out your talents. And if you're kind of writing for someone else and it's not the true you, we may be admitting somebody that the fit isn't going to be there, because the essays are not just a tool to hold somebody out. Think of them as they're a tool as we build the community to know how do we build it and let people in and be a part. And so if it's really not you, you may end up at an institution that maybe isn't exactly the fit for you, and that's the danger.
I want to take AP classes in my high school, but I'm not sure I'll get all A's. Should I still take them?
That is really almost the million-dollar question that I'm asked constantly. And I think let's back that up a little and talk about balance and risk. That's what we're talking about here. We want students that want to be intellectually challenged and not always take the safe bet. That being said, whether you're in an AP class or a age-specific course or a grade-specific course, you still need to do well. So there's a balance there. If somebody were in a high school, and again, remember I'm talking in generalities here. If somebody were in a high school and that high school offered 10 honors programs, honors courses, maybe 10 AP courses and a couple IB courses, and you didn't take any, but you came out with a really good GPA, that wouldn't look very good at all, because the rigor of your curriculum then comes into play. So you need to balance, taking off, being intellectually challenged, and knowing you just protecting that GPA. Remember, as we talked earlier, one variable doesn't get you in or out. It's the multiplicity of all of these. And so my best advice would be you need to be in college preparatory courses, AP, IB. A lot of schools, particularly private schools, may not even offer, they'll say all of their courses are honors courses, which is okay as well. That will be reflected in the school profile from the counselor. But what we're looking for, did people seize the environment they were in? And seizing it doesn't mean if they offer 10 AP, you should take all 10. But I hope that helps you think about the balance of your APs. But at the end of the day, if you take all APs and you're getting Cs, we would think that there's some judgment issues here, because you're more concerned of taking the course, but you've not mastered the topic before. So there's some balance, and that helps us understand intellectual and maturity development of the student as we're building the community as well.
How do colleges find out about the quality and size of my school?
Every student here at Vanderbilt, and again, any of the schools that I've worked at or consulted with or been with, they require what's called a high school profile. And a high school profile is a profile of the high school that lets us know the courses offered, the rigor of that curriculum, lets us know of the students how many AP, IBs and that were offered, lets us know how many go on to college, it lets us know we look for mean distributions within and distributions of A, B, C, and D, and class rank or percentile, because we're looking at the competitiveness of that environment, because that environment may be different than another school environment, and that's where we start getting that a 4.0 at one school may not be a 4.0 at another school. You're looking at the curriculum, the rigor.
What can I do to ease some of the stress surrounding the college admissions process?
When I talk with students a lot, and I'll say, tell me the schools you're looking at, and they'll rattle off 5 schools. Any of those schools educationally are going to be superb. We are so fortunate in the United States to have the top higher education in the world. So the student will say, here are my 5 choices, and I feel like if I pick the wrong one, and I'm like, first of all, educationally, you can't go wrong at any of them. Second, extracurricularly, prestige-wise, you can't go wrong at any of them. And that brings us back to the fit. The ability to say, where do I look like I resonate, feel like I can add to that community and be an active citizen is the critical piece. What ends up happening though, and is one thing I'd help to reduce the stress, is I tell students, don't make it a public discourse of the 29 schools you're looking at. Because then all of a sudden, if you're not admitted, you choose not to go there, you have everybody in what I call the admissions cheap seats doing second guessing. It's your life, it's your choice. And so I find students, and sometimes parents, and in most cases more parents, it becomes about a reflection of the parent, the reflection of how will I be perceived at the bridge club, the country club, my business partners, my colleagues at work, where my child goes. And what we need to make sure we do is that you find the best fit so you will be successful. And sometimes if it becomes, I'm applying and then they rattle off all of these schools, then you don't get in, then you feel like you're embarrassed. You shouldn't be embarrassed. Part of this is getting out and trying and where you see the fit. And so sometimes I say students should contain it a little more. The other thing is, my experience is this, for what it's worth. If a student has a certain SAT and they tell you, in most cases it's 50 points less. Everybody, publicly wants to say, and they never really want to admit, the test score is one measure, one day for a handful of hours. We need it for a national norming, the ability to look from students from different school districts and corporations and high schools, but that also becomes a stress. It's not a competition of who can get the best test score. It's just simply not. That is one variable, but we tend to get caught up as who we are as a human in a number. Would we like a number at sometimes to be higher? You bet. But that doesn't take away who you are as a unique contributing individual to your family and your community. And if you can learn to separate that if I'm denied, it's not denied because Dean Christiansen is a bad person. It's denied because the fit didn't appear to be there in all these variables. Very different. And if it's too internalized, I've just seen it becomes very stressful. And as you know, a real concern I have is, it becomes very serious with some students, right to the point of suicide or pre-suicide or attempt to, it's very serious that you've got to be able to disassociate your self-esteem with where one's admitted.
My parents have good jobs, but we haven't saved much for college. Will I be able to get financial aid?
The first thing I would tell you, independent, there's so many myths about will I get financial aid, will I not get financial aid, that my number one piece of advice is fill out the federal form. That's required for all federal programs, and most schools take the federal form, and then some will also have an additional what's called profile. Fill those out, because what I find students end up doing is mom hears that the next door neighbor didn't get aid, and they've made the impression in their mind, well, we must have more money than them, so if they didn't get it, we surely won't get it. It's free. Yeah, it takes a couple, an hour and a half, hour to fill out, but I would highly first recommend that. The other thing is that may do, depending on the student, someone may not get a Pell Grant or the SCOG or some of the federal programs, but institutions have need-based aid too, particularly a school like Vanderbilt. We're one of 25 to 30 schools in the United States that meets full demonstrated need, and we're 100% need blind. So what that means is, if you can't afford to come based on our methodology, not based on what your parents think, so there's a divide there, we're going to make that up in gift and loan to you. Filling out the form at least lets you know what you might get. The other thing is, people confuse institutional funds with federal funds. And at a school like Vanderbilt, our average gift award is $30,000 a year per student. So that's a lot of money. So some are getting more, some are getting less, but that's the average gift. And so apply and see first of what you can get. You may not get any gift money, but you may look at some structured loans, how they work, and so a combination of what you can earn during the school year, what little your parents may or may not have set aside for you, how you would take some loans that are deferred, meaning you don't have to start paying those back until upon graduation and all that. So really applying is the first thing, instead of what I see families do is kind of psych themselves out of anything to begin with. Now that may end up being the case at the end, but you never know. And I've just seen families who didn't apply, and then 2 years later I'm talking, I'm like, why apply? And then they would have gotten it the whole, something. But they make assumptions of where their wealth is to the neighbor. And remember, a lot of federal aid and institutional aid has to do with income, number of dependents, extenuating circumstances, equity of homes, equity of assets, and so it's a complex picture that just making the judgment, they didn't get it, I won't. I sure wouldn't. Don't find yourself in that spot.
Is a private school always more expensive than a state school?
That's really hard to tell, because what you want to really look at is the net cost to you after everything's paid. So a lot of times in a state program, the tuition and total cost is less, but there's less aid to give. In a private education, the cost is more, but then it's adjusted for your income. And so to some degree, you could actually be equal, or in some instances, actually it may be cheaper to go to a private school than a public school based on their financial aid policies. And so what you want to do is make sure you've taken advantage of those free opportunities and analysis so you know. The other thing is sometimes families get really caught into where they think their lot in life is. And part of college is pulling up your bootstraps and changing that. So if your family was here, whatever here is, and you have a site you want to be here, the only way you're going to get there is you got to be a full contributing member in this group of schools that are going to help get you there.
How many people actually decide if I'm going to get admitted or not?
Typically the process, and I will give you a brief synopsis here at Vanderbilt, but would be a standard metric or a standard rubrics, if you will, at most schools like Vanderbilt, or the Ivies and schools like Vanderbilt. The application is going to come in, there's going to be an initial read, and that's typically the person called the territory manager. The manager, I visited that high school, I probably already talked to you when you apply or were thinking of applying, or perhaps not as well. That comes in, and so we've broken out the United States all that way. So there's somebody, then there's what's called a second reader, and that second reader comes along, the first person makes a series of decisions and notes and that. The second one comes along and then does their read of the file. Those two together, if they both agree, then goes to what's called a sign-off officer, which is a senior member in the staff. And then that sign-off officer either comes up with kind of agrees with the deny. Let's hold that for a while to see what happens in the whole pool, to we think that should be an admit. That admit still never happens until the day we send the admit letters, because it's changing. So that's a third person. Then when we look at, through our series of our evaluation, there's kind of that maybe broader clear admit based on this, and kind of that broader clear deny. Then there's this whole pool in the middle. And then that is where every single one comes to the admissions committee, and the territory officer advocates to admit that student to a group of 3 people. I chair all of early decision 1 and early decision 2 with 2 senior members. Then in regular decision, I chair one of the committees with 2 senior people, and then we have 2 other committees, just of sheer volume. And then that all comes together, and then in that time, it's someone right there, and they're verbally, you're telling me about that student, and I'm making, as a group, we make a decision, admit or deny at that point, or hold again. And then it goes back, we just think it's just should be admitted, oh, maybe shouldn't, can't quite make, it goes back into the hold pile, and then we whittle that again, and then eventually that final group then comes back to me and the senior folks, and we look at that one more time.
How do I choose who should write my letters of recommendation?
We want somebody who can talk about the applicant, who has seen their maturation over a period of time, that can tell us some insight about their character, their background, their experiences, than, so if it's a math teacher, a science teacher, maybe how they took on a particular research project, how they handled that, how they led the group, or what have you, versus kind of the, well, they're a good person. The good person doesn't cut it, you know, and so it's really who can talk about you, not who is the most important person you know that can write a letter.
As an admissions insider, what tips can you give me to help me sound my best in my application?
I would make sure that you've investigated the school and you know who we are. Because in a lot of the things we're ascertaining and asking you, we're figuring out how much do you know about us, because again, it's to the fit. I would clearly look at some of those base facts or base issues of, does it read well? Is it grammatically put together properly? Those types of things. I would also make sure that your essays, as we've talked about already, are your authentic voice. They're you coming through, not so prepackaged. The other thing is that you were mature enough to follow the instructions that if we say 500 words, we want 500. We don't want 1,000. That you were mature enough that you picked recommenders that can talk about you as the person, not of the belief you needed to pick the most famous person you know, or your parents' neighbor knows. So those would be kind of the tips I would give. I would say if it was a little earlier before the application process, is I encourage students to do this a lot. If they're a sophomore, is one of the things, or a junior and they're starting to narrow their, you know, or they're looking at 20 schools or 10 schools at that point, go out and print out their application. Start looking a couple years before you come, what looks like the questions they're asking, so that you have a sense of what that value on that campus is, because that then helps maybe guide you in choices to prepare an application. I say that with a little bit of hesitancy though, because you don't want it to look like you have prepackaged. You want it to be this authentic. So those would be kind of the pieces I would give. And I always love to give an example of a school I worked at once where their kind of arch rival in the student's essay, the essay was reading along smashingly well. I'm so excited. This is the dream school I want to go to, talking about the school I was working at. Then in their final paragraph, they noted the other school because they didn't change their Word document. So you want to think about that you've just done some of those base facts, that you're talking to the school, and that wonderful search and replace, you do that. If there's anything I can leave today, it is the application process. We look at applications to admit you, not to deny. So because we're building a community of learners in this wonderful building, this new freshman commons, we're building a sense of a class, and we want those people that we admit, that we're trying to build that so that it's a wonderful experience for all. And if we don't quite really know who you are, it's not going to work.